The lunch that ended 37 years of marriage. My name is Helen. I'm 68 years old. For 37 years, I believed I had a good marriage. Not a perfect one. Perfect marriages don't exist. But I believed we had built something real, something strong enough to survive the ordinary disappointments that come with growing older together. Looking back now, I realize I was the only one building it. Raymond was my husband. We met when I was 29 and he was 32. He wasn't the loudest man in the room or the most charming. He was quiet, dependable, and the kind of person who made you feel safe. Or at least, that's who I thought he was. We married less than a year after we met. Like most young couples, we didn't have much. Our first apartment was so small that if one of us opened the oven door, the other had to step aside just to walk through the kitchen. We laughed about it back then. We told ourselves we'd remember those days when life became easier. And eventually, it did. Raymond worked in commercial construction. I worked as an accountant for a local manufacturing company. Unlike Raymond, I actually enjoyed numbers, budgets, tax returns, retirement planning, investments. He hated all of it. Every year, he'd toss a pile of unopened envelopes onto the dining room table and smile. "Helen, you're the smart one. You handle this stuff." So I did. I paid every bill, managed every investment, bought and sold every stock, filed every tax return, handled every mortgage payment. When we bought our first rental property, the paperwork went into my name because I was already handling the financing. The second property ended up the same way. Then the vacation cabin. Then our investment accounts. It wasn't some clever plan. It just happened naturally. Raymond couldn't have cared less whose name appeared on the documents. He trusted me completely. At least, that's what I believed. We never had children. Life simply didn't work out that way for us. There were years when that broke my heart. Eventually, we accepted it. We poured our love into our home instead. Every Sunday morning, we drank coffee on the back porch. Every October, we drove into the mountains to watch the leaves change colors. Every Christmas Eve, Raymond insisted on making hot chocolate, even though he always made it too sweet. Those little traditions convinced me our marriage was solid. Maybe not exciting, but solid. Our friends often joked that we were the couple everyone else wanted to become. 37 years, they'd say. That's real love. I smiled every time, because I believed it too. The only thing that had changed during the last few years was Raymond's work schedule. He started taking more business trips. At least, that's what he called them. Phoenix, Dallas, Denver. Sometimes he'd leave for 3 days. Sometimes an entire week. I never questioned it. Construction companies travel. That's normal. Or so I thought. One Thursday afternoon, everything changed. I'd spent the morning buying groceries. The weather was beautiful. Warm sunshine. A light breeze. The kind of day that makes you drive with the windows down. On my way home, I decided to stop at a small Italian restaurant downtown. It wasn't somewhere Raymond and I usually went. I simply wanted a bowl of soup and a quiet lunch before heading home. The hostess smiled when I walked in. "Table for one?" "Yes, please." She grabbed a menu. But before we reached my table, I noticed something strange. Several people were looking toward the back corner of the restaurant. Then they looked at me, then back again. Their expressions weren't curious. They were uncomfortable, almost sympathetic. I frowned. That's when I followed their gaze. Near the large front window sat a man wearing a navy blue sport coat. I recognized that jacket immediately. I'd bought it for Raymond last Christmas. My heart skipped a beat. He wasn't alone. Across from him sat a woman. She looked to be in her mid-40s. Elegant. Confident. Beautiful in a way that didn't seem forced. She was laughing. And Raymond, my husband, was holding her hand across the table. Not casually. Not like two friends comforting each other. He was slowly running his thumb across her fingers. The exact same gesture he'd used with me for decades. For a second, I honestly wondered if I was dreaming. Nothing around me sounded real anymore. The conversations disappeared. The music faded. Even the smell of fresh bread seemed to vanish. There was only that table. And the man I'd trusted for 37 years. Someone at the next table whispered, "Oh my God." I realized they knew who I was. Everyone was waiting to see what I would do. I slowly walked toward them. Each step felt heavier than the last. When I was only a few feet away, Raymond looked up. Our eyes met. I expected panic, shock, guilt, anything. Instead, he sighed. Not because he'd been caught, but because the secret was finally over. "Helen." His voice was calm. "I've been meaning to tell you." Those 7 words shattered my world. I looked at the woman. She quickly pulled her hand away. I'm Diane," she said quietly. She actually stood up and reached out her hand. "I'm sorry we had to meet like this." Meet like this? As though we were neighbors being introduced at a barbecue. I stared at her hand for several seconds before looking back at Raymond. "How long?" That was all I could say. No screaming. No accusations. Just 3 words. "How long?" Raymond rubbed the back of his neck. He couldn't look at me anymore. Finally, he whispered, "Almost 3 years. 3 years. 3 birthdays. 3 anniversaries. 3 Christmas mornings. 3 years of lies sitting across the dinner table from me every single night." I felt something inside me go completely numb. The waitress hurried over. "Ma'am, are you all right?" I couldn't answer, because I honestly didn't know. I turned around, walked out of the restaurant, and climbed into my car. I sat there with both hands gripping the steering wheel so tightly my knuckles turned white. People walked past my car. Life continued as though nothing had happened. But mine had just ended. I didn't cry. Not yet. Some heartbreak is simply too big for tears. I started the engine, drove home, and spent the next hour sitting alone in my driveway, staring at the front door of the house I'd shared with Raymond for nearly 4 decades. For the first time since we bought that house, it didn't feel like home anymore. That evening, at exactly 6:42 p.m., I heard Raymond's truck pull into the driveway. I looked through the living room window. He stepped out carrying a suitcase. And somehow, I already knew what was about to happen. The sound of Raymond's truck engine faded as he shut it off. For a few seconds, everything outside was completely still. I stood behind the living room curtains, watching him through the window. He wasn't rushing. He wasn't nervous. He walked toward the front door carrying a single black suitcase, the one we always used for weekend trips. The sight of it made my stomach twist. That suitcase had traveled with us to Maine, to Colorado, to our 20th wedding anniversary in Charleston. Now it was carrying the end of our marriage. I stepped away from the window just before he unlocked the front door. When he walked inside, he froze for a moment. The house smelled like beef stew. I'd started cooking it that morning because it was his favorite. The dining table was already set for 2. 2 bowls. 2 glasses. 2 folded napkins. A life prepared for someone who had already left long before I knew it. Raymond slowly set his suitcase near the hallway. Neither of us spoke. The silence between us felt heavier than any argument we had ever had. Finally, he looked at me. "Helen." I held up my hand. "No." He stopped talking. "I've listened to you for 37 years. Tonight, you're going to answer my questions." He nodded once. I took a deep breath. "When did it start?" He stared at the floor. "About 3 years ago." "I already know that." I kept my voice calm. "I asked when it started." He swallowed hard. "I met Diane during a construction project in Phoenix. She worked for the architecture firm. So it wasn't one mistake. No. It wasn't one bad decision. No. It was a relationship." Yes. I closed my eyes. Somehow hearing him admit it hurt even more than seeing them together. "Did everyone know?" He hesitated. "A few people at work." "A few." He didn't answer. That silence told me everything. People had watched me smile beside my husband while knowing he was living another life. "Did our friends know?" "No." "Our neighbors?" "No." "Our families?" "No." So I was the only fool. He looked up quickly. "Helen, don't say that." "Why not?" "It isn't true." I laughed. It wasn't a happy laugh. It was the kind of laugh people make when reality becomes too painful. "For 3 years you kissed me goodbye every morning. You called me every night from your business trips. You celebrated anniversaries with me. You looked me in the eyes every single day. And you expect me not to feel foolish? He didn't have an answer. Instead, he quietly sat down at the kitchen table, the same chair where he'd eaten dinner almost every night for 37 years. I never wanted to hurt you. I looked at him in disbelief. You've said that twice today. I mean it. No, Raymond. I shook my head. You didn't want to face the consequences. That's different. He looked exhausted, older than he had that morning. I didn't plan for this to happen. Really? So the 3 years just happened? He rubbed his forehead. I fell in love with her. Those words landed harder than anything else. Not because I believed them, but because he believed them. He had rewritten our entire marriage inside his own mind. I walked to the stove and turned off the burner beneath the stew. The smell filled the kitchen. It was your favorite, I said quietly. What? The stew. He looked at the pot. I started cooking it around noon. Neither of us said another word. After a long silence, he stood up. I think it's better if I leave tonight. You already left. His shoulders dropped. He opened his suitcase. It wasn't empty. It already contained clothes, toothbrush, shoes, medicine. Everything had been packed before he came home. He hadn't come to talk. He'd come to move out. That realization hurt in a completely different way. He hadn't made this decision today. He'd made it days ago. Maybe weeks. Maybe months. While I was planning dinners. He had been planning his exit. As he packed the last few things from our bedroom, I stood in the doorway watching. The framed wedding photo still sat on his dresser. He picked it up, looked at it for a few seconds, then quietly placed it back down. He didn't take it with him. Around 8 o'clock, he carried the suitcase to the front door. Before opening it, he turned around. I'll have my attorney contact you. Attorney. Not counselor. Not mediator. Attorney. That's when I knew there was no saving this marriage. He had already decided how the story would end. I hope one day you'll forgive me. I looked at him for a long moment. Then I answered honestly. I don't know if I ever will. He nodded, opened the door, and walked away. I stood there listening as his truck disappeared down the street. The silence that followed felt endless. That night, I didn't sleep. I walked from room to room, touching photographs, bookshelves, old furniture. Every corner of that house held a memory. Our first Christmas tree, birthday dinners, movie nights, lazy Sunday mornings. I wondered how many of those memories had been real, and how many had only been real to me. At 3 in the morning, I made myself a cup of coffee. Then I walked into my home office, the room where I'd managed our finances for decades. File cabinets lined one wall. Investment folders filled another. Without really knowing why, I opened the first drawer. Property deeds, retirement statements, tax records, rental agreements. Everything was exactly where I'd left it. I spent the next 2 hours quietly reviewing every document. Not because I distrusted Raymond. That feeling had already disappeared. I simply needed to understand where I stood. As the sun began rising outside my window, I noticed something that hadn't crossed my mind before. Every major asset, every investment account, every rental property, every deed, every retirement portfolio carried one name. Mine. Not because I'd planned it that way, but because Raymond had always refused to deal with paperwork. For the first time since leaving the restaurant, I felt something other than heartbreak. I felt clarity. Raymond thought he was walking away from our marriage. What he didn't realize was that he might also be walking away from the life he believed belonged to him. I saw fear. Not because he had lost me, but because he suddenly realized he might have misunderstood everything about the life he thought he owned. A comfortable retirement. She believed she had married financial security. Raymond had never corrected her. And sooner or later, the truth always has a way of introducing itself. She just didn't know. That day was coming much sooner than either of them expected. I studied her expression. She didn't look arrogant anymore. She looked confused, heartbroken, and desperate for the truth. Something told me this conversation was about to change everything. He looked thinner, older, more tired than I'd ever seen him. For a few seconds, he simply stood there, staring at the house. The same house he'd walked away from without looking back. Finally, he slowly walked toward my front door. Then he knocked. 3 soft knocks. I stood inside the hallway, looking through the small glass window beside the door. For a brief moment, I wondered if I should pretend I wasn't home. Instead, I reached for the doorknob. Because somehow, I already knew why he had come. I looked at him for a long moment. Then I said quietly, "I forgive you." His head snapped up. "You do?" "Yes." His face filled with hope. But before he could speak, I gently shook my head. "Forgiveness doesn't mean we belong together again." His smile slowly disappeared. "I finally found peace, Raymond. And I'm not willing to lose it." He closed his eyes. As tears fell silently onto the wooden porch, I realized this wasn't the end of his punishment. It was only the beginning of living with the consequences of his own choices. And I folded the letter carefully and placed it back into the envelope. For the first time, I genuinely hoped she found peace too. Because betrayal has a way of leaving scars on everyone involved, even those who never expected to be part of the story. That night, I sat alone on my back porch with a cup of tea. The air was cool. The stars were bright. I closed my eyes and realized something. For months, I had been telling myself the story of everything I had lost. But sitting there, I suddenly saw something different. I hadn't lost my future. I'd gotten it back. What I didn't know was that life still had one final surprise waiting for me. A surprise that would remind me that sometimes the best chapters begin after the ones you never wanted to end. Still, I had no idea that only a few weeks later, I would see Raymond one final time. And that final meeting would bring our story to its true ending, because healing doesn't happen the day someone apologizes. Healing begins the day you stop waiting for the life you lost and start building the life you still have. If there's one lesson my story taught me, it's this: someone else's betrayal does not define your value. Loyal people often believe everyone else thinks the way they do, but not everyone does. And that's why protecting your peace is just as important as protecting your heart. I never got revenge. I never wanted it. Life handled the consequences far better than I ever could. I simply chose to keep walking. And looking back now, that was the greatest decision I ever made.